Hey guys, it's Kaylee and welcome back to Hippie in a Suit, where I talk about sustainability because I dream of a world where there isn't an island of plastic 3 times the size of France in the Pacific. Hi there and welcome to another deep dive in my SDG series. For those of you who are new to this channel, these videos go into detail on each of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. Now, because of the depth I go into, they tend to be pretty lengthy, but at the end, I do summarize the goal in like 2 minutes, so if you just want that super high-level overview, you can jump to that section by checking out the chapters in the description box below. And if you haven't already watched my primer on the SDGs, I do recommend checking that out first so that you understand the overall framework that each of these goals is a part of. Today, we're zooming in on SDG 14, which is life below water, and specifically looks at oceans. Oceans cover 70% of the Earth's surface and are crucial to planetary systems and the economy, but they're in crisis due to the activities of humans. This SDG covers the fight against ocean pollution, acidification, and overfishing, and advocates for better protection and management of our oceans. As always, you will find a link to my blog post in the description box below that includes links to all the research used in this video, resources where you can learn more about SDG 14, and a few organizations who work on the topic that you may choose to follow and support. Okay, without further ado, let's dive into SDG 14, Life Below Water. Oceans are fundamental to life as we know it on this planet. While many of us associate oceans with beauty and leisure, they actually play an important role in many critical planetary functions. Before we dive into the targets, let me just go over a few of these functions so you get an idea. Plankton and aquatic plants in the ocean provide 50% of the oxygen we use to breathe and live. The ocean is a crucial part of our global weather, climate, and temperature regulation systems. 98% of the heat from the sun is absorbed by the ocean. This heat is then moved around the Earth via currents. The ocean also plays a critical role in the water cycle. According to the Ocean Conservation Trust, when the sun shines and the warm currents heat the ocean, water evaporates. This not only forms clouds, but also increases the air temperature and humidity, creating weather. The clouds then get blown back over land where it rains, and this water is used by every living thing on the planet before making its way back into the ocean. Without this process, most of our planet would just be a desert. The ocean is a critical source of food for people and animals. The ocean provides protein for nearly 3 billion humans every year. And in addition to these fundamental life systems, the ocean is also a massive part of our global economy. The World Economic Forum estimates oceans contribute 70 trillion to global gross domestic product every single year. Now that we have that big picture, let's dive into the targets. Target 14.1. By 2025, prevent and significantly reduce marine pollution of all kinds, in particular from land-based activities including marine debris and nutrient pollution. To begin understanding marine pollution, let's look at the 2 specific elements that are mentioned in this target: marine debris and nutrient pollution. According to the U.S. National Ocean Service, marine debris refers to any persistent solid material that is manufactured or processed and directly or indirectly, intentionally or unintentionally disposed of or abandoned into a marine environment. Marine debris includes everything from trash like cans and plastic bags to fishing gear or capsized naval vessels. It's associated with a number of environmental, economic, safety, health, and cultural issues, including injuring and killing marine life, interfering with navigation safety, and posing threats to human health. Marine debris is measured by plastic debris density. Nutrient pollution is when too many nutrients, primarily nitrogen and phosphorus, are added to bodies of water and act like fertilizer, causing excessive growth of algae. The primary sources of nutrient pollution are fertilizers, animal manure, sewage treatment plant discharge, detergents, stormwater runoff, cars and power plants, failing septic tanks, and pet waste. Nutrient pollution causes eutrophication, in which fertilizer leads to that excessive algae growth. Severe algal growth blocks light that is needed for plants such as seagrass to grow, and when the algae and seagrass die, they decay. In the process of decay, the oxygen in the water is used up, and this leads to low levels of dissolved oxygen in the water. This leads to a condition called hypoxia, which effectively creates dead zones that kills fish, crabs, oysters, and other aquatic animals. Nutrient pollution is measured by an index of coastal eutrophication, which is based on loads and ratios of nitrogen, phosphorus, and silica delivered by rivers to coastal waters. Unfortunately, when it comes to marine pollution, it appears that things are progressively getting worse. 80% of marine debris in the oceans comes from plastic pollution. Around 0.5% of the plastic waste we produce ends up in the ocean, which equates to 1 to 2 million tons of plastic entering our oceans every single year. Although I will note that I have found a range of figures here, some as high as 8 million tons per year and some as little as 1 million. It's estimated that there are roughly 50 to 75 trillion pieces of plastic currently in the ocean. And unfortunately, these rates are not slowing down. Recent studies assert that without urgent policy action, the rate at which plastics enter the oceans could increase by around 2.6 times between now and 2040. Now, looking at nutrient pollution worldwide, the number of coastal areas impacted by eutrophication caused by excess nutrients stands at over 500. Recent coastal surveys by the US and the EU found that 78% of the US's coastal waters and 65% of Europe's Atlantic coastal waters exhibit symptoms of eutrophication. Dead zones in the world's oceans have increased from 10 cases in 1960 to over 400 documented cases in 2008, 169 identified as hypoxic, 233 as areas of concern, and 13 as systems in recovery. Target 14.2. By 2020, sustainably manage and protect marine and coastal ecosystems to avoid significant adverse impacts, including by strengthening their resilience, and take action for their restoration in order to achieve healthy and productive oceans. This target is focused on management and protection of marine and coastal ecosystems. Marine conservation is the protection and preservation of ecosystems in oceans and seas through planned management in order to prevent the overexploitation of these marine resources. It is measured by the share of coastal and marine areas that are protected, specifically looking at the number of countries using ecosystem-based approaches for managing marine areas. Ecosystem-based approaches consider the connections within the ecosystem, focusing on the importance of ecological integrity, biodiversity, social and economic factors, and overall ecosystem health. Unfortunately, there's very little data available about how many countries are using these approaches. Our World in Data has tracked about 15, but notes huge data gaps. Target 14.3. Minimize and address the impacts of ocean acidification, including through enhanced scientific cooperation at all levels. Ocean acidification is the process of decreasing pH of the ocean due to elevated levels of CO2 in our atmosphere. According to NOAA, the ocean absorbs about 30% of the carbon dioxide that is released into the atmosphere. As levels of atmospheric CO2 increase from human activity such as burning fossil fuels and changing land use, the amount of carbon dioxide absorbed by the oceans also increases, rendering the ocean more acidic. The IEA further explains this threat as a twofold challenge. 1, higher acidity, and 2, lower availability of carbonate ions. Calcifying organisms such as oysters, crabs, sea urchins, lobsters, and coral need carbonate ions to build and maintain their shells and skeletons, and studies suggest that marine shells and skeletons may dissolve more easily as the pH decreases. Energy spent by marine organisms overcoming more acidic conditions reduce the energy available for their physiological processes, such as reproduction and growth, and this threatens the stability of food chains. Between 1950 and 2020, the average pH of the ocean surface fell from approximately 8.15 to 8.05. This may not seem like a lot, but the pH scale is logarithmic, so this change represents approximately a 30% increase in acidity. We are already seeing the tangible impacts of this globally. For example, the world has lost about 14% of its coral reefs since 2009. Target 4.4. By 2020, effectively regulate harvesting and end overfishing, illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and destructive fishing practices, and implement science-based management plans in order to restore fish stocks in the shortest time feasible, at least to levels that can produce maximum sustainable yield as determined by their biological characteristics. So you've probably guessed that this target is looking at fish stocks. It's measured by the proportion of fish stocks within biologically sustainable levels. But how do we define a biologically sustainable level? Fish stocks are classified as within biologically sustainable levels if their abundance is estimated to be equal to or greater than the level that can produce the maximum sustainable yield. The MSY is the largest long-term average catch that can be taken from a fish stock under prevailing environmental and fishery conditions. Fish stocks become overexploited when fish are caught at a rate higher than the population can support. The world produces around 200 million tons of fish and seafood every year. This comes from a combination of wild fish catch and fish farming. The demand for fish is estimated to be twice the supply of sustainably caught wild fish. According to the World Bank, almost 90% of global marine fish stocks are now fully exploited or overfished. If we want to just look at overfishing, the number of overfished stocks globally has tripled in half a century, and today, fully 1/3 of the world's assessed fisheries are currently pushed beyond their limits. In addition, more than 1/3 of all sharks, rays, and chimeras are now at risk of extinction because of overfishing, according to the IUCN. The situation is worse in low-income and middle-income countries where weak regulation and enforcement have produced above-average declines. Illegal fishing constitutes an additional challenge as it accounts for around 20% of the global catch, undermining the efforts of both small and large fishing enterprises to implement sustainable fishing regimes and making it harder for well-managed fisheries to compete in international markets by undercutting fair pricing. We will get to fishery subsidies more in Target 14.6. Target 14.5. By 2020, conserve at least 10% of coastal and marine areas consistent with national and international law based on the best available scientific information. Now, this is one of those targets that's a holdover from the Aichi biodiversity targets. I have talked about this in previous videos, but as a quick refresher, the global community set a group of biodiversity targets in 2010 that are referred to as the Aichi biodiversity targets. All of these targets were meant to be met by 2020, so when the SDGs came along in 2015, governments decided to incorporate these targets into the SDG framework. That's why you'll see a few random 2020-focused targets in some of the biodiversity-focused SDGs. Since the SDGs adoption, the global community has also reached another multilateral environmental agreement referred to as the Global Biodiversity Framework, or the GBF, at the end of 2022. The GBF calls for 30% protection of oceans by 2030. Sadly and unsurprisingly, we did not hit that 10% by 2020 coastal marine conservation goal. It is estimated that today roughly 7% of the world's oceans are under some form of protection, but according to the Marine Conservation Institute, less than 3% of the ocean is fully or highly protected. However, this number varies greatly depending on the country. Some countries have a great deal of territorial waters that are protected. For example, France and Kazakhstan protect about 50%, whereas others are barely protecting any of their territorial waters. For example, Liberia, Cote d'Ivoire, Nigeria, and Ghana protect less than 0.1%. There is a great interactive map that I will include in the blog post in case you want to have a look at how your country is doing on ocean conservation. Target 14.6. By 2020, prohibits certain forms of fishery subsidies which contribute to overcapacity and overfishing, eliminate subsidies that contribute to illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing, and refrain from introducing new such subsidies, recognizing that appropriate and effective special and differential treatment for least and developing countries should be an integral part of the World Trade Organization fisheries subsidies negotiation. Again, as you can tell by the reference to 2020 in this target, this is another holdover from the Aichi targets. This target calls for a global agreement that prohibits subsidies for certain harmful forms of fishing by 2020. Now, I am happy to report that the WTO did in fact reach a fishery subsidies agreement in June 2022, but unfortunately it has not yet come into force as it's waiting for the 2/3 adoption by WTO member states. This would be 109 states, and so far we only have 52 who've adopted it. Regardless, the deal still was historic. The International Institute for Sustainable Development, which, side note, is where I used to work, points out that the fishery subsidy deal is the first WTO agreement focused solely on sustainability and the second multilateral agreement reached in the organization's almost 3 decades of existence. The agreement prohibits subsidies in situations where concerns about sustainability of fishing activities are the clearest. For example, when illegal, unreported, and unregulated fishing activities have been identified, when the health of fish stocks is assessed and their biomass is determined to be at alarmingly low levels, and finally, when fishing occurs in unregulated high seas fisheries, meaning that no entity has competence for managing stocks sustainably. Let's just hope that more countries sign on and that this comes into force rapidly. Target 14.7. By 2030, increase the economic benefits to small island developing states, SIDS, and least developed countries, LDCs, from the sustainable use of marine resources, including through sustainable management of fisheries, aquaculture, and tourism. According to UNCTAD, fish trade contributes between 0.5 and 3% of GDP depending on the country. LDCs and SIDS are two country groups where the contribution to GDP of fisheries is the highest. In some of these countries, fisheries contribute as much as 10% or more to GDP, and fish consumption accounts for 90% of animal protein in their population's diets. In addition, coastal and marine tourism accounts for over 50% of the global tourism industry. These activities are crucial economic development activities, and this target aims to increase the benefits to SIDS and LDCs and to generally enhance the sustainable management of these activities. It's measured by sustainable fisheries as a proportion of GDP in SIDS and LDCs and all countries. And unfortunately, the contribution of sustainable fisheries to GDP is declining worldwide, with the largest drops noted in least developed countries according to the FAO. Growing economies and declining fish stocks have led to a lower contribution of sustainable fisheries to GDP at the global level. In SIDS and LDCs, sustainable fisheries fell to 0.5% and 0.7% of GDP respectively. However, you do have to dig into the data a little bit more to get the full picture. This decline was largely because of economic growth in other sectors, which reduced the relative importance of fisheries. At the same time, the value added of the fishery sector has increased consistently by several percentage points year on year. This has led to a positive trend in the contribution of sustainable fisheries in regions such as West Africa. Now, the SDG 14 goal also has 3 means of implementation targets focused on knowledge, technology, market access, and conservation. Target 14.A. Increase scientific knowledge, develop research capacity, and transfer marine technology, taking into account the Intergovernmental Oceanographic Commission criteria and guidelines on the transfer of marine technology in order to improve ocean health and to enhance the contribution of marine biodiversity to the development of developing countries, in particular SIDS and LDCs. Target 14.B. Provide access for small-scale artisanal fisheries to marine resources and markets. Target 14.C. Enhance the conservation and sustainable use of oceans and their resources by implementing international law as reflected in the United Nations Convention on the Law of the Sea, which provides the legal framework for the conservation and sustainable use of oceans and their resources, as recalled in paragraph 158 of The Future We Want. I swear sometimes these means of implementation are just such a mouthful, but you get the idea. Okay, that's it for the targets. Let's summarize and wrap this one up. SDG 14 looks at oceans which cover 70% of the Earth's surface and are crucial to our planetary systems and economy. It is made up of 7 targets and 3 means of implementation that cover the fight against ocean pollution, acidification, and overfishing, and that advocate for better protection and management of our oceans. Target 14.1 aims to reduce marine pollution, specifically marine debris and nutrient pollution, which cause problems for ecosystems and aquatic life. Unfortunately, plastic pollution and nutrient pollution are increasing. Target 14.2 calls for the sustainable management and protection of marine and coastal ecosystems through ecosystem-based approaches. Target 14.3 aims to address ocean acidification, which is caused by increased levels of CO2 in our atmosphere. Unfortunately, the average pH of the ocean surface fell from approximately 8.15 to 8.05, and this acidifying trend shows no sign of slowing down. Target 14.4 looks to sustainably manage fish stocks and to prevent illegal and overfishing. Currently, about 1/3 of global fish stocks are overfished. Target 14.5 calls for 10% conservation of marine and coastal ecosystems by 2020. This is a holdover Aichi target and has now been replaced by the Global Biodiversity Framework, which calls for 30% conservation by 2030. It is estimated that today roughly 7% of the world's ocean is under some form of marine protection. Target 14.6 calls for the creation of a global deal prohibiting fishery subsidies, And an agreement was reached at the WTO in 2022, but is currently waiting for adoption by WTO member states to come into effect. Target 14.7 aims to increase the economic benefits of the ocean to small island developing states and least developed countries. Currently, the overall contribution is falling, but there are some promising examples of countries where sustainable fisheries are positively contributing to economic development. SDG 14 also has 3 means of implementation targets focused on knowledge, technology, market access, and conservation. And that's SDG 14, Life Below Water. And that's it. That's all I have for you. If you learned something in this video, give it a like, and I'll be back very soon with SDG 15, Life on Land. As always, don't forget to check out the blog post if you want more information or to continue learning about this topic. See you in the next one, and until then, keep fighting the good fight. Bye!